The ice on Europa's surface was 3 kilometers thick, and beneath it lay an ocean that humans had been exploring for decades. But deeper than the ocean and hidden inside the moon's rocky core was something that no one outside of a select few knew existed. Dr. Richard Hayes stood in a control room that should not be there. Around him, 300 scientists and engineers worked at stations that monitored systems humanity had spent 30 years building. The room was huge and the equipment was advanced beyond anything that existed on Earth or any of the human colonies. Everything here was secret and everything here was illegal according to the treaties humans had signed with the Galactic Council. Richard stared at the screen in front of him and read the numbers again. Next to him, Dr. Lisa Chen adjusted the holographic display that showed complex equations floating in the air. She had been working on this project for 12 years and her eyes were tired, but her voice was excited. She told Richard that they had run the simulation 6,000 times, and the results never changed. Dark matter was not just theoretical anymore. It was real and they could control it. More importantly, they had figured out how to turn it into a weapon that would make the Council's technology look like Stone Age tools. The facility had been built in secret starting 30 years ago when humanity's first deep space probe had come, back with shocking information. The galaxy was not empty and it was not friendly. A small group of military leaders and scientists had made a decision that day. They decided that humanity would prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. They built this facility under Europa where the ice would hide it from alien sensors. They recruited the best minds from every human colony and brought them here. They told the rest of humanity nothing because secrets were only safe when almost no one knew them. Richard asked Lisa to show him the fleet status and the holographic display changed to show something magnificent and terrifying. 12 ships floated in a pocket of folded space that existed outside of normal reality. Each ship was 3 kilometers long and covered in black metal that absorbed all light. They were invisible to every sensor that the Council species used. They existed in a state that was both real and unreal at the same time. The Council had no idea these ships existed, and Richard intended to keep it that way until the perfect moment arrived. A man entered the control room without making any sound. His name was Captain Greg Sullivan, and he moved like a cat despite being over 2 meters tall. He was one of the first volunteers for the Human Augmentation Program that had changed 2,000 soldiers into something more than human. His bones were stronger than steel. His reflexes were faster than any normal person could achieve. His brain processed information at speeds that would have been impossible before the modifications. He had given up his normal life to become a weapon for humanity, and he did not regret it. Greg told Richard that they had detected 3 Council enforcement fleets conducting exercises near human space. The timing seemed suspicious, and it looked like the Council was testing humanity's responses. Lisa said that the Council was trying to see if humans would panic or fight back. Richard thought for a moment, then said that humanity would do neither. Not yet, anyway. He asked Greg how long until the fleet was fully operational. Greg said that 72 hours remained before the dark matter reactors stabilized and the weapon systems finished calibration. He warned Richard that once they used this technology, there would be no going back. The entire galaxy would know what humans had built. Richard nodded slowly and said that the galaxy was about to learn an important lesson. Humanity did not ask for respect anymore. They would earn it through strength. Down in the lower levels of the facility, engineers worked on the ship's most devastating systems. The dark matter cannons could punch through shields that had survived supernova explosions. The quantum drives could move ships across the galaxy in seconds. The neural network allowed every human in the fleet to share information, instantly turning individual ships into one unified fighting force. In another part of the facility, Lieutenant Amy Foster stood inside a simulation chamber. Her neural implants glowed faintly as she connected directly to the weapon systems. She had run combat simulations hundreds of times, fighting virtual battles against every species in the Council. Humanity had studied their enemies for 3 decades. They had analyzed every war and every battle and every tactical decision. The Council had shared their military history freely, never imagining that the primitive humans were learning from it. Amy had memorized the weaknesses of every Council species. She knew which shields failed under certain frequencies. She knew which hull materials cracked under rapid temperature changes. She knew which species panicked when their command ships were destroyed. Amy opened her eyes and disconnected from the simulation. She told the technicians that she was ready and that the entire combat wing was ready. All they needed was the order to deploy. But Richard was not ready to give that order yet. The fleet was humanity's secret weapon, and you did not reveal your secret weapon until the perfect moment. That moment had to be chosen carefully. If they deployed too early, the Council might have time to develop countermeasures. If they deployed too late, humans might suffer losses they could not afford. Richard walked through the facility looking at the work that represented 30 years of human effort. Everything here had been built without Council knowledge or Council help. The technology was entirely human in origin, developed through trial and error and countless failures. Hundreds of scientists had died in accidents during the research phase. Test pilots had been lost when early prototypes malfunctioned. The price had been high, but the result was worth it. Humanity now possessed weapons that could threaten the most powerful species in the galaxy. But weapons were only part of the equation. Richard knew that technology alone would not save humanity. They also needed unity and determination and the willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive. The Council thought humans were divided and weak. They thought human governments argued constantly and could never agree on anything important. They were wrong. When it came to survival, humans had proven throughout their history that they could set aside their differences and work together. This facility was proof of that. Scientists from every human nation and colony had collaborated here. They had shared knowledge freely and worked toward a common goal. Richard returned to the control room and looked at the display showing the 12 ships. Soon those ships would emerge from hiding. Soon the galaxy would see what humanity had built. Soon the Council would understand that they had made a terrible mistake when they mocked the humans. But not yet. Richard was patient, and he knew that patience was often the difference between victory and defeat. He would wait for the right moment. He would wait until the Council's arrogance was at its peak. And then he would show them the truth. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not primitive. Humanity was dangerous, and the Council was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The massive hall stretched out before them like an endless ocean of polished black stone. Commander Jake Morrison walked slowly across the floor with his boots clicking against the surface. Beside him, Lieutenant Sophie Bennett carried the data tablets that held all of humanity's achievements. They had traveled 3 months to reach this place, and now they stood before 73 alien species that ruled the galaxy. The air smelled strange and the lights hurt their eyes, but they kept walking forward. Above them, the ceiling showed stars and planets that humanity had never seen. This was the Galactic Council, and today humans would ask to join their ranks. Jake stopped at the center of the hall, where a small platform waited for them. Sophie stood next to him, and they both looked up at the towering seats where the Council members sat. Some of the aliens were huge and covered in scales. Others were small and floated in bubbles of liquid. Some looked almost human, but their eyes were too large or their skin was the wrong color. All of them stared down at the two humans with expressions that Jake could not read. He cleared his throat and began to speak. His voice echoed in the vast chamber, and he tried to sound confident even though his heart was pounding. He told them about Earth and how humans had built cities and civilizations. He explained how they had reached their moon and then gone further to Mars and beyond. He described the 40 star systems where humans now lived and worked. He spoke about the technology they had developed and the peace they had maintained among their colonies. Every word was true and every achievement was real, but as he spoke, he could hear sounds from the Council members. They were laughing. Not loud laughter, but quiet sounds of amusement that grew louder with each sentence he spoke. Sophie's hand tightened on the tablets and Jake saw her jaw clench, but they both kept standing there. When Jake finished speaking, a crystalline alien leaned forward from his seat high above them. His body was made of something that looked like glass, and light shined through him in rainbow colors. The translator device in Jake's ear turned the alien's words into English. The alien's name was Vextharn, and his voice dripped with mockery. He asked what humans could possibly offer to the Council. He said that 40 systems was nothing compared to what real civilizations had achieved. He told Jake that human ships were slow and clumsy. He said human weapons were primitive toys. He explained that humans lived such short lives that they barely had time to learn anything before they died. Another Council member joined in the mockery. This one was a serpent creature named Jakar who coiled around his seat like a living rope. He said that some species had colonized hundreds of systems before they even invented writing. He asked why the Council should care about a species that still used chemical explosions to power their weapons. He suggested that humans should go home and come back in a few thousand years, when they had actually accomplished something worth noticing. The other council members made sounds that the translator told Jake were agreement and laughter. Sophie stepped forward slightly as if she wanted to speak, but Jake touched her arm gently to hold her back. Jake took a deep breath and spoke again. He said that humans may be young, but they had survived many dangers. He explained that Earth had faced ice ages and asteroid impacts and plagues that killed millions. He told them that humanity had learned to work together despite their differences. He said that humans were quick learners and hard workers. He asked the council to give them a chance to prove their worth. His words sounded desperate even to his own ears, and he hated that, but he had to try. This was why they had come all this way. Vestan made a sound like breaking glass, and the translator called it laughter. He said that surviving on one planet was something that children did. He told Jake that real species conquered the dangers of space and time and dimensions that humans could not even imagine. He said that the council had no use for species that were still learning to walk. Then he leaned back in his seat and conferred with the other council members. The hall filled with alien voices speaking in languages that made Jake's head hurt. Sophie stood rigid beside him, and he could feel the anger radiating from her body. She had lost her brother in an accident on Mars, and she had spent 15 years working to reach this moment. Now these aliens were treating them like stupid children. After several minutes of discussion, Jakar uncoiled and spoke in a voice that filled the entire hall. He said that the council would grant humans something called observer status. This meant that humans could attend council meetings and watch what happened. They could send representatives to discuss issues, but they would have no vote on any decisions. They would have no protection under council laws. If another species attacked human colonies, the council would not help them. He said this was a generous offer for such a primitive species. He suggested that in a few thousand years, if humans survived that long, the council might reconsider their position. The vote happened quickly, and every single council member agreed. Humanity would be tolerated but not respected. They would be allowed to watch but not to participate. They would be considered less than every other species in the galaxy. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach as he realized that coming here had been a mistake. They should have stayed hidden. They should have built up their strength before revealing themselves. But it was too late now. The galaxy knew about humanity, and the galaxy thought they were weak. Jake and Sophie walked out of the council hall in silence. Their footsteps echoed in the empty corridor, and neither of them spoke until they were far away from the chamber. Finally, Sophie stopped walking and turned to look at Jake. Her face was red and her hands were shaking, but when she spoke, her voice was calm. She said that the council had no idea what they had done. She said that humans did not forget insults like this. She said that humanity would remember this day. Jake nodded slowly and looked back at the distant council hall. He said that Sophie was right. The council thought they had put humans in their place, but what they had actually done was make an enemy. Not an enemy that would attack right away, but an enemy that would prepare and plan and wait. And when the time was right, humanity would show these arrogant aliens exactly what humans were capable of achieving. The alarm woke Commander Jake Morrison in the middle of the night cycle on the diplomatic station. His quarters shook as the door burst open and Sophie Bennett ran inside. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking as she pulled up the tactical display on his wall screen. The image that appeared made Jake's blood turn cold. 50 warships were descending on Earth, and each one was the size of a small moon. They belonged to the Korvax Dominion, which was one of the most aggressive species in the Council. The ships were already entering the Sol system and they were moving fast. Jake was out of bed, instantly pulling on his uniform and demanding to know why this was happening. Sophie showed him the official Council statement that had been broadcast across the galaxy. The Korvax claimed that a human colony ship had violated their territorial boundaries. They said the ship had crossed into Korvax space without authorization, and this was an act of war. Sophie's voice cracked as she explained that the statement was a complete lie. The colony ship they mentioned had been destroyed by a meteor storm 3 months ago. Everyone in the Council knew this because humans had filed an official report about the disaster. Jake understood immediately what was really happening. This was not about territory or boundaries or unauthorized crossings. This was a message from the Council to humanity. They were reminding humans of their place in the galactic order. The Council had grown tired of human diplomats asking questions and making suggestions. They wanted to show humanity what happened to species that did not know their place. The Korvax were simply the tool the Council was using to deliver this message. On the tactical display, Jake watched as Earth's defense fleet moved to intercept the Korvax invasion force. 40 human ships had been positioned around Earth specifically to defend against threats like this. They were the pride of humanity's military, and they represented decades of engineering and innovation. Jake had attended the commissioning ceremony for half of those ships. He knew the captains and many of the crew members. Now he watched helplessly as those ships prepared to face an enemy that vastly outnumbered them. The lead human ship was a carrier called the Liberty, and it moved into firing position first. The tactical display showed the Liberty launching everything it had at the nearest Korvax vessel. Plasma cannons fired at maximum power, sending bolts of superheated energy across space. The shots hit the Korvax ship directly, and for a moment Jake felt hope. But then the hope died as he watched the plasma dissipate harmlessly against the alien shields. The Korvax ship had not even been scratched. In response, the Korvax fired a single shot from their particle beam weapon. The Liberty simply ceased to exist. One moment it was there, and the next moment there was nothing but debris and expanding gas. Sophie made a sound like she had been punched in the stomach. Jake felt sick, but he could not look away from the display. More human ships were engaging now, firing everything they had at the Korvax fleet. Missiles and lasers and kinetic rounds filled space, but nothing penetrated the alien shields. The Korvax responded methodically, destroying human ships one at a time. They were not in a hurry. They were taking their time and making sure that everyone watching could see exactly how outmatched humanity was. A message came through from Admiral Price, who commanded the defense fleet. His face appeared on Jake's screen, and behind him the bridge of his flagship was in chaos. Alarms were blaring and crew members were shouting reports. The Admiral looked old and tired as he told Jake to evacuate the diplomatic station immediately. He said the Council was not going to intervene. They were letting the Korvax teach humanity a lesson. Jake asked how long the fleet could hold, and the Admiral laughed bitterly. He said they would be lucky to last another 10 minutes. The Korvax were playing with them like a cat plays with a mouse. They could end the battle any time they wanted. The Admiral's expression hardened as he spoke his final words. He told Jake to give a message to the Council. Tell every species that humanity would remember this day. Tell them that humans never forgot when they were wronged. Tell them that someday somehow humanity would make them regret what they were doing. Then the transmission cut off as 3 more human ships exploded in rapid succession. Jake turned to Sophie and told her to gather everyone from the human delegation. They were leaving the station immediately and heading for Europa. Sophie asked why Europa, and Jake said that it was time for the Council to meet the real humanity. She looked confused, but she nodded and ran to execute his orders. Within 20 minutes, 43 humans from various diplomatic posts were crowded into their transport ship. The ship pulled away from the station and accelerated toward the outer Sol system. As they traveled, Jake kept watching the tactical display. The Korvax were broadcasting the battle across the entire galaxy. They wanted everyone to see this. They wanted every species to understand what happened when you challenged the Council's authority. Human ships continued to die. Captains rammed their vessels into Korvax ships in desperate suicide attacks. But even those sacrifices accomplished nothing. The alien shields held, and the Korvax simply destroyed the wrecks and moved on to the next target. By the time Jake's transport reached Jupiter's orbit, Earth's entire defense fleet was gone. 40 ships and 12,000 people had been eliminated in less than 1 hour. The Korvax fleet was now in orbit around Earth, and they were preparing to land troops. Jake knew what would come next. They would occupy Earth's major cities. They would show humanity what it meant to be a conquered species. The Council would watch and approve, and humanity's brief time as an independent civilization would be over. But then something impossible appeared on the tactical display. Europa's surface was opening. Massive doors that should not exist were revealing depths that could not be there. Jake's pilot shouted in surprise, and Sophie grabbed Jake's arm as they all stared at the screen. Rising from beneath Europa's ice came 12 ships that were black as space itself. They were enormous, and they moved with a grace that human ships had never achieved. Their hulls seemed to absorb light, making them look like holes in reality. Jake felt himself smile for the first time since the invasion had begun. He recognized what he was seeing, even though he had never seen it before. This was the dark matter fleet that had been whispered about in certain military circles. This was the secret project that humanity's brightest minds had been working on for 3 decades. This was the response that Admiral Price had died hoping to see. The Korvax had come to teach humanity a lesson, but they were about to receive an education of their own. The 12 ships finished emerging from Europa and they began moving toward Earth. They accelerated impossibly, fast crossing distances in seconds that should have taken minutes. The Korvax fleet detected them and began turning to face this new threat. Jake imagined the confusion and surprise that the Korvax commanders must be feeling. They had thought they knew everything about human technology. They had thought humans were primitive and weak. They were about to learn how wrong they were, and Jake knew that the galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. Counselor Vexitharn was reading reports about the successful Korvax operation when his instruments detected something that should not be possible. Space itself was tearing open near Jupiter and something massive was emerging. He demanded answers from his science officer, who was frantically checking readings. The officer said he did not know what it was. The readings were inconsistent with any known technology in the Council database. Whatever was coming through was big, and it was using principles of physics that should not exist. The dark matter fleet appeared on every sensor in the Sol system at exactly the same moment. This feat alone should have been impossible, but the 12 ships materialized as if they had always been there waiting to be noticed. The Korvax fleet, which had seemed so powerful just moments ago, suddenly looked very small. The human ships were 3 times larger than the biggest Korvax vessel, and they moved through space with an elegance that suggested complete mastery of their technology. Captain Greg Sullivan stood on the bridge of the lead ship, which was called the Vengeance. His enhanced senses processed information from hundreds of sources simultaneously. Around him, 200 crew members sat at their stations with neural implants glowing softly in the dim light. They were connected to each other through a consciousness network that allowed them to think and act as a single entity. When one person saw something, all of them saw it. When one person had an idea, all of them could build on it. They moved as one and thought as one, and when the time came, they would strike as one. Greg ordered his communications officer to open a channel to the Korvax command ship. The Korvax commander appeared on the screen looking reptilian and confused. His scales were a sick green color and his eyes were too large for his head. He demanded to know what this new development meant. He asked if these were more human toys. His voice carried the same arrogance that all council species used when speaking to humans. Greg felt no anger at the tone. He simply felt pity for someone who did not understand how badly they had miscalculated. Greg spoke in a calm voice and explained that this was humanity's response to the invasion. He gave the Korvax commander one opportunity to withdraw all forces from Earth orbit immediately. If the Korvax declined this offer, then the human fleet would remove them by force. The Korvax commander's confusion turned to amusement. He laughed and said that the Korvax Dominion had conquered 1,700 worlds. He began to explain that humanity had not learned the basic lessons about power and respect, but Greg cut him off mid-sentence. Greg said that the Korvax had 60 seconds to begin their withdrawal. He suggested that they use those seconds wisely. The Korvax commander snarled something in his native language that the translator refused to process. Then he closed the channel and Greg watched on his tactical display as all 50 Korvax warships powered up their weapons. They began moving toward the dark matter fleet in an attack formation that had probably won them countless victories over the centuries. Greg felt no satisfaction in what was about to happen. This was simply necessity and humanity. Had learned long ago that necessity did not care about feelings. Greg turned to Lieutenant Amy Foster, who sat at the weapons console with her neural implants glowing brighter than anyone else's. She was fully connected to the dark matter cannons, and she could feel the power flowing through the ship's systems. She said quietly that she was engaging targets. Her fingers moved across holographic controls that only she could see. The rest of the crew watched their displays and waited for what they knew was coming. The Vengeance fired a single shot that was invisible to normal sensors. The dark matter projectile moved through space faster than light, and it passed through the Korvax flagship's shields as if they were not there. The ship did not explode the way normal weapons would cause. It did not burn or break apart. Instead, it collapsed in on itself as gravitational forces crushed it into an impossibly dense sphere. In less than 1 second, a vessel that had been 3 kilometers long became a ball of compressed matter the size of a basketball. The sphere glowed briefly with the heat of compression, then went dark. The Korvax fleet stopped moving. Greg could imagine the shock and horror that the alien crews must be experiencing. They had just watched their flagship destroyed by a weapon that made no sense according to their understanding of physics. 49 Korvax ships remained, and after a moment of frozen disbelief, they all opened fire simultaneously. Thousands of particle beams and plasma bolts and kinetic missiles filled the space between the fleets. It was enough firepower to sterilize a planet or crack open a moon. The barrage struck the dark matter fleet and simply vanished. The human shields operated on principles that the Council could not comprehend. They did not deflect or absorb energy the way normal shields did. Instead, they redirected incoming attacks into pocket dimensions where the energy dissipated harmlessly. From the outside, it looked like the human ships had not been hit at all. Greg waited 5 seconds to let the Korvax understand that their weapons were useless. Then he gave the order to return fire. 11 more dark matter cannons spoke, and 11 more Korvax warships collapsed into dense spheres of crushed matter. The remaining ships broke formation as panic overrode their military discipline. Some tried to run while others continued firing uselessly at the human fleet. Amy reported that the Korvax were attempting to flee, and Greg said to let them go. But first they needed to send a message. Amy's fingers danced across her controls, and every surviving Korvax ship received the same transmission. It was footage of the battle showing their flagship's destruction from multiple angles and in slow motion. Following the footage was a single sentence translated into every known language in the galaxy. The message said to tell the Council what they had witnessed here today. Greg wanted to make sure that every species in the galaxy heard about this battle. He wanted them to understand that humanity was not weak anymore. The Korvax fleet retreated at maximum speed, leaving their dead behind. In less than 5 minutes, the most feared military force in this sector had been utterly defeated by 12 human ships. Greg watched them go and felt no triumph. This had been necessary, but it had also been sad. The Korvax had died because the Council had sent them to punish humanity. They had been tools of a larger arrogance, and now they were gone. On the diplomatic station, Counselor Vextharn watched recordings of the battle with growing horror. His crystalline body flickered with colors that indicated extreme distress. This was not possible. Humans were primitive. They were children who had barely learned to walk among the stars. They did not have technology that could defeat Council species so easily. His science officer's voice shook as he reported the analysis. The energy signatures from the human weapons were unique and unlike anything in their databases. This technology appeared to be entirely human in origin. Vextharn felt something he had not experienced in 3 centuries of life. He felt fear, not the abstract concern that came from political problems or economic issues. This was primal fear of a threat that could destroy his entire civilization. If humans could build weapons like this, what else were they capable of? What other secrets had they been hiding while the Council mocked them and treated them like amusing primitives? He realized with sickening clarity that the Council had made a terrible mistake. Vextharn ordered an emergency Council session to be convened immediately. Every member species needed to see what had just happened. They needed to understand that everything had changed. Humanity was not a joke anymore. They were not observers who could be ignored. They were a power that had just demonstrated the ability to defeat Council forces with contemptuous ease. The galaxy had shifted beneath their feet, and Vextharn knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The Galactic Council chamber had never been so quiet. Every species that had mocked humanity just weeks ago now sat in stunned silence as holographic displays showed the battle footage on loop. 12 human ships had defeated 50 Korvax vessels in less than 5 minutes. The recordings played from multiple angles showing the Korvax flagship collapsing into a sphere of crushed matter. The weapon that did this was unlike anything the Council had ever seen. The silence in the chamber was not peaceful. It was the silence of species that had just realized they might have made a fatal mistake. Commander Jake Morrison stood before the Council once more, but everything was different now. Sophie Bennett stood beside him as an equal, not as an assistant carrying tablets. Behind them, a holographic projection showed the dark matter fleet in all its terrifying glory. The ships rotated slowly in the display, and their black hulls seemed to absorb the light in the chamber. Jake let the silence stretch for several long moments before he began to speak. His voice was calm and measured as he reminded the Council that they had asked humanity what they could contribute. He said that he believed the question had now been answered. Counselor Jakar's serpentine form coiled tightly around his seat, which Jake's diplomatic training told him was a defensive posture. The alien's voice was sharp with anger as he said that this was an outrage. Humanity had developed weapons of this magnitude in secret and in violation of first contact protocols. They had deceived the Council and broken treaties. Shekar said that this was proof that humans could not be trusted. Sophie stepped forward and her voice cut through the chamber like a knife. She said no with such force that several council members actually flinched. Sophie explained that humanity had not deceived anyone. They had prepared themselves for survival. There was a fundamental difference between those two things. She reminded the council that they had welcomed humanity to the galaxy by explaining how weak and primitive and beneath notice humans were. The council had made it clear that humanity would receive no help and no protection. So humanity had adapted. They had learned everything they could about the galaxy. They had built weapons to defend themselves. They had made sure that the next time someone decided to teach humanity a lesson, that species would regret their decision. Vextharn's crystalline body flickered with agitated colors as he spoke. He accused humanity of murdering 12,000 Korvax soldiers. He said that this was a war crime, and that the Council should punish Earth for this atrocity. Jake's expression hardened and his voice grew cold. He pointed out that the Korvax had murdered 12,000 human soldiers just 3 hours before the Dark Matter fleet appeared. But he did not hear the Council condemning that action. He did not see emergency sessions called when human blood was spilled. He said it was funny how the Council's morality seemed to only apply to Council species. A holographic figure appeared next to Jake, showing Dr. Richard Hayes projected from Europa. He addressed the Council with the calm authority of someone who held all the winning cards. He explained that the Dark Matter fleet represented humanity's minimum defensive capability. Humans had spent 30 years developing this technology, and they would continue to advance it. He made it clear that humanity would share none of this technology with the Council or its member species. Not now and not ever. The Council could not be trusted with weapons this powerful. The chamber erupted in outraged voices. Dozens of species began shouting demands and threats. Some said that humanity should be forced to share their technology. Others said that the human colonies should be blockaded until they surrendered their weapons. Still others suggested that humanity should be expelled from the Council entirely. Richard Hayes waited for the noise to die down before he continued speaking. His voice carried clearly through the chamber, and gradually the aliens fell silent again. Richard said that humanity was willing to negotiate real membership in the Council. Not observer status. Not probationary membership. Full membership with voting rights and territorial protection and equal standing among all species. The Council could either accept humanity as an equal partner, or they could continue treating humans as primitives. But he promised that if they chose the second option, they would regret it for the rest of their civilization's existence. Shekar hissed that this was blackmail, and Richard corrected him calmly. This was negotiation, he said, and the Council had always operated on the basis of strength. Humanity had now demonstrated their strength clearly. Captain Greg Sullivan appeared next to Morrison. His enhanced form drew nervous glances from species that could see the modifications that made him more than human. He added his own statement to Richard's words. The Dark Matter fleet was currently deployed throughout human space. If any species attempted another incursion into human territory, the response would be immediate and overwhelming. Humanity would not ask permission. They would not file diplomatic protests. They would not wait for Council deliberation. They would simply act with the full force of their military capability. Councillor Vextharn was silent for a long time. His crystalline body pulsed with colors that Jake's translator could not interpret. Finally, he said that the Council would deliberate on humanity's petition and provide an answer within one standard cycle. Jake shook his head firmly. He said no. The age of humanity begging for scraps from the Council's table was over. Humans were not asking anymore. They were telling the Council what would happen. Either humanity received full membership by the end of this session, or they would withdraw from all Council interactions entirely. Humanity would defend its own territory and establish its own alliances, and build its own galactic order. The silence that followed was absolute. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the quiet. Then a new voice spoke. It was Councillor Tavor who represented the eternal consciousness. This species was so ancient that they had been present when the Council was founded 3 million years ago. Tavor had never spoken during Jake's previous appearance. She had simply observed in silence while younger species mocked the humans. Now her voice filled the chamber, sounding like wind through crystal caves. Tavor said that in 3 million years she had seen 1,000 species petition the council. Most faded into obscurity within a few centuries. Some rose to prominence and became important voices. But never had she seen a species transform themselves so completely in such a short time. She paused, and the chamber waited for her judgment. She said that the eternal consciousness recognized humanity's petition. They voted for full membership. The chamber erupted again, but this time the voices were different. Some species quickly added their votes, seeing opportunity for alliance with this new power. Others voted grudgingly, recognizing that reality had changed whether they liked it or not. Within 1 hour, the vote was completed, and it was unanimous. Every single council species voted to grant humanity full membership. Jake knew that many of them were voting out of fear rather than respect, but he did not care. Fear and respect often looked the same from the outside. What mattered was that humanity now had equal standing with every other species in the galaxy. They had voting rights and territorial guarantees and access to council resources. They had achieved in one day what most species took thousands of years to accomplish. As the session concluded, Vextharn approached Jake. The crystalline being who had mocked humanity so thoroughly now looked smaller somehow. He said quietly that humanity had made him look foolish. Jake met his gaze without sympathy or anger. He explained that Vextharn had made himself look foolish. The council had assumed that young meant weak. They had assumed that different meant inferior. Those were their mistakes, not humanity's. Sophie added that the council should remember this lesson because humanity was not the only young species in the galaxy. Someday someone else would stand where humans had stood, asking for respect. Maybe next time the council would think twice before mocking them. 3 months later, the Europa facility hosted representatives from 5 younger species who had heard about humanity's success. Dr. Richard Hayes welcomed them personally and began teaching them. But he did not share weapons technology or military secrets. Instead, he shared philosophy and perspective. He told them that the council respected strength, but strength came in many forms. Technology was one form, unity was another. But the most important strength was the refusal to accept that someone else got to define your worth. The younger species listened carefully and took notes. They understood that humanity had changed the galaxy forever. The dark matter fleet remained deployed as a silent reminder of humanity's power. But more important than the weapons was the shift in thinking they represented. The galaxy was no longer divided simply into the strong and the weak. Now there was a third category that the council had never considered: those who refused to be underestimated, those who prepared in secret and struck when the moment was right, those who would rather die than accept a subordinate position. Humanity had shown the galaxy what that category looked like, and other species were paying attention. The council's age of unchallenged dominance was over, and a new era had begun. An era where respect was earned through strength and determination. An era where humanity stood equal to species that had ruled the stars for millions of years.